Did you just put the ring on, or are you in the first few years of your marriage? Welcome to the First Year Marriage Show, a podcast dedicated to helping newlyweds navigate the first few years of marriage. My husband, Marcus, and I will be sharing marriage tips to help you build a strong foundation for your marriage. We believe having a strong foundation is essential to having a happy, healthy, and lasting marriage. We will also be learning from the experiences of awesome married couples who have been where you are today, taking from them lessons to help you build a strong foundation for the lasting marriage you desire. Take a deep breath, relax, learn, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of the First Year Marriage Show. In today's episode, I'm excited to share with you the first year marriage experience of Nick Pavlidis. Nick is a writer, speaker, coach, and lawyer. He's married to a very patient woman and has 2 great kids. You can find him podcasting with his 5-year-old son at 5minuteswithdad.com. In addition to podcasting with his son, he also writes and podcasts about taking personal responsibility over improving your marriage at aterriblehusband.com. So, Nick, can you tell our listeners who you are, how you met your wife, how long you've been married, and what you do for a living?
Sure. Well, see, it's kind of interesting. We have the worst how you met your spouse story in history of meeting spouses. I met my wife at a funeral.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of my friends passed away in a motorcycle accident, and he was her first cousin. And we're around the same age. So all of the cousins and friends hung out after the services, and we just started talking, and yada, 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 we got married. And so there are several ways we can do it. We talk about it, rather, and that's something, the way we see it is that something beautiful came out of something so challenging and so, sad. But
I know it's very, very sad to go to a funeral and not expect to have something exciting happen, because usually with funerals, it's not a really good place for people to do a lot of exciting things because of the emotions that we are all going through. But it's comforting to know that you met your wife during a funeral, and you took the best chance that you had at that venue. Like, you didn't go there thinking, because it's a funeral, I'm just gonna weep, and that's all I'm gonna do. You saw something that you really liked, and you pursued your wife, and it really resulted in you guys getting married and having 2 awesome kids and having a great marriage.
Yeah, I think, it clearly wasn't my first plan going into the funeral. Like, I'm going to look around and find a beautiful lady to chat up with. But, I think part of the setting helped facilitate our relationship sort of starting out in a very innocent and a very, emotional way, where we had something in common. In this case, it was a loss in common, but we weren't both in there. If I had met her at a bar, or I had met her, supermarket or whatever, clearly the initial conversation would have been an attraction. It would have been something about a relationship. But in this case, it was, 2 people there helping each other heal emotionally and sharing stories about, love lost, whether it was a friend or a cousin. And it really, in many ways, I credit that with putting us in a mindset that helped facilitate something really strong.
So, Nick, how will you describe your first year of marriage in 1 or 2 words?
Well, it's funny. When you gave my intro and cited my URL for my podcast and my marriage coaching and writing, it's aterriblehusband.com. My brand is Confessions of a Terrible Husband. So, we have something strong and had something strong at the beginning. The middle is really where a lot of my mistakes were made. So my first year of marriage, in 1 or 2 words, it was challenging. It was hopeful, but it was challenging because I was so focused on my work, and at the time I was practicing law in a large New York law firm, and I was so focused on my work because in my mind, my work would provide some sort of stability, whether it's financial or professional or some sort of a foundation to build a relationship on. And really I had it backwards. And it's the family that has proven to be the foundation for me to thrive in business. But in my first year, and even my first 4 years or 5 years of marriage, I've been married 6 years now, a little over that, I had it flipped, and I was hoping everything would trickle down from a successful career. So that's why it was quite challenging, because I was hopeful to have a strong marriage, but I was doing all the wrong things.
Wow, that is pretty nice to know, because without my first year of marriage, I didn't see it as very, very challenging. I saw it as being a year that was filled with a lot of emergency stuff for us to do, like one thing happening after another. But with yours being that challenging, I could definitely relate with it, because I also had some challenges whereby I was challenging myself to be able to think from me to we, because we now had something in common. We are both together as one, and we had to work towards the achievement of one goal, which is to have a peaceful marriage and to be able to raise responsible kids in a peaceful environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even from the mindset of not just thinking about me, but yeah, I can handle this because then I can do that. That's a mindset that I would be in, whether it was working or playing soccer or other sports. It's, my shin hurts, but that's okay. I can keep running. Or, just even a few years ago, I broke my foot playing soccer and it hurt, but I played the rest of the game because I can handle it. Now, you start thinking, when you start shifting to we, it's, yes, I can handle it, but how does it affect her? So if I have a broken foot, or if my foot hurts, even something as simple as that, I may take, I will take a break and get it checked out, because I know if I'm out of commission for 6 weeks because I broke it worse, my wife now has such a heavier burden taking care of kids for 6 weeks with me in a cast, as opposed to if I were just able to bounce back in a few weeks. So even to the simplest things, like I can get through this, it's not as simple anymore, because it's not about me getting through this. It's about how does this affect, and how does my next decision affect everyone around me?
Yeah, that is a pretty neat example that you've illustrated, and I'm pretty sure our listeners are going to relate with that very well. It's not just about thinking about me. Once you start thinking about how everything you do impacts your marriage and impacts your wife and your kids, it just makes everything a whole lot much easier for you, and it makes your decision making very, very easy and very, very simple, and something that you could easily implement in your day-to-day activities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Nick, I know with marriage, a lot of people get into marriage thinking, oh, this is what my marriage is going to be like. So with you, what kind of marriage or role expectations did you have before getting married, and how did you discover that you had these marriage expectations?
Well, it worked out pretty interestingly in my situation, because my parents both worked 70 hours a week and still work 70 hours a week.
Wow.
At a restaurant locally here. And my wife's, and they've been together for 40 years. My wife's parents got divorced when she was young, and each got remarried. So they've all right away pretty much. So they've been in long-term 20 plus year marriages since then. But the experience that I had as a child versus what my wife had as a child was two different things. So we both had different expectations of what a husband looks like, a husband's role looks like, or what a wife's role looks like. So we came together, and we really, before marriage, we didn't really have much of a conversation about what our daily life would look like. And it's funny, because that's what we live, a daily life. There are big pictures, and then there were small pictures. So like you say, I had a vision of my day where I'd work, and I'd come home, and my wife would have prepared dinner or whatever it is. I had similar views in many ways, partly because I knew going into my marriage that my wife liked to cook, but she also worked. So when we first got married, for the first 2 years, I don't know, maybe about a year or so, she worked until we had our son, our first child, our son. And it was like that. But it wasn't every day. It was when she had time. She worked a very demanding job. So we both quickly adapted to that sort of lifestyle. It wasn't really going to work out that way. And even with a son, she's home, but it's really almost more of a challenge to her to take care of the house, because, she's putting everything together and he's pulling everything apart. So, our expectations were perhaps that we were going to have what people think of as the traditional roles, where one person works and one person tends to the house. But in reality, first of all, especially with the kid stuff, I really enjoy spending time with them, even if it's changing diapers. It doesn't affect me. So we do split the duties. But I think the challenge in that was that, we had a different viewpoint, a different definition, perhaps, about what a role could could or should be, or where to divide the lines. So like if my wife is way more talented than I am cooking, so it's natural for us to have her take on more of the cooking than me. She's also cleaner than I am, so she naturally takes on cleaning up more than I do. But then there are other things that there are things on the other side that, you know, I'm more inclined to do or more experienced in doing. So I'll do some things like that. And that's even things like emptying the dishwasher. I enjoy the time that it takes to do that. And my wife thinks it takes too long. So I do things like that. But where our struggle was, or where we've struggled, is where there isn't that clearly defined either interest or talent or predisposition to do a particular house chore. So we have, you know, one of us does or doesn't want to do it, and the other, and we just never communicated effectively on dividing that up. So when you come into a relationship with a preconceived notion, and there's no strong push in one direction to either say, no, that's not the way it's going to be because I enjoy cooking more, or because I, you know, enjoy taking out the trash and taking a walk down the driveway or something like that, you know, where there's no clearly defined answer, then that's where we've had our challenges.
What really happened for you guys to be able to determine that this is actually something that we need to work on with our expectations? Like, when did you guys realize that this is what you were doing in order to be able to come to a compromise to decide that you are going to do this and then I'm going to do that?
Well, for the first several years, the compromise was very one-sided, and it was to my benefit. and it's one of the things that I've been working very hard to identify, things that perhaps unfairly put on her lap, or things that I could even do that, you know, by taking it off her plate, it improves her day-to-day, it improves her days, and by putting it on my plate, it has very little effect. Like taking the dishes out of the dishwasher. I enjoy that time, but I listen to podcasts, or I will listen to books on tape while I'm doing that, and that stuff I'm going to be doing anyhow. So whether I'm sitting on the couch or emptying a dishwasher, it doesn't really make a difference to me. I'm still enjoying, I'm still learning, I'm doing things that I would normally be doing. I'm just moving a dish while I'm doing it. So things like that, I've taken an effort to try and identify, and I've identified a few things like that. Whereas, you know, it's still a work in progress, and, you know, but it's not a science, but it is something that I had to come to the realization, and really it was just, you know, after 4 or 5 years of that I am not lifting my weight when it comes to the small day-to-day activities. I can be as loyal, I can be as successful in business, I can be as kind, I can, you know, in general, but those are the big things that just give you, they give you the ticket to being a husband, but they don't give you the ticket of having, that's not what it takes to have a great marriage. And marriage is about the day-to-day. It's about the big picture too, but the day-to-day, you have more days in between than you have large events. And while it's important to have that solid base of being kind and gentle, you know, managing your daily life is something that I struggled with, and now I'm working hard to get better at.
That's pretty good. I'm glad you've both been able to come to a compromise and be able to agree on what you'll be doing. And you've even taken the mantle to do certain things whilst you are listening to your podcast. Sometimes, like when I get home, I know my wife is tired, and even though she's tired and I'm also tired, I know she's been with our daughter all day long. So what I do is I'll just come in and be like, okay, you go take 5 minutes off, just go rest, relax, and then I'll take care of our daughter. And during our first year, I didn't have the opportunity to work, so she was working and bringing home all the income. So what I did most of the time was make sure the house was in order, even though our roles switched. Instead of me doing what she's doing now, I was doing what she used to do back in our first year. And that really helped us. It was a big adjustment for me personally, but it was something that we had to do to move forward and progress in a marriage and be able to have the kind of marriage that we wanted to have. So with the expectation that you had, did you guys have to make any adjustments during your first year at all, or you didn't have to go through any adjustments?
Well, towards the end of our first year, we were expecting our son. So we got married in May of 2008, and our son was born in June of 2009. So our first year was was quite a transition in preparing to have a child and sort of life planning, because at the time we lived in a small one-bedroom apartment right in the heart of New York City, right in between Times Square and Central Park, and it was 600 square feet, which is, it was big by New York standards, but it clearly wasn't a place that the traditional family would look to raise one or two or more kids. So our first year was sort of life planning a little bit. What direction are we going to go? Are we going to stay in New York? Are we going to move to New Jersey and still work in New York? Or is she going to continue to work outside the home? Or are we going to pick up and go home? And home to us is Massachusetts, where we are now. But we ended up staying in New York, or rather working in New York. My wife stayed home with our son, and we moved to New Jersey. So that transition was more of a, we were almost decision based during the first year, where it was, okay, we need to make a decision about this, so let's move this way, as opposed to sort of adjusting to how things progressed on a daily basis. But at the time, we one of our mistakes, I think, was that we focused more on what effect our son's going to have on our on our life, rather than how can we complement our relationship by welcoming and taking care of our son, and where does our family want to be? Our focus really turned from each other to our son, and what do we want for our son? And that was, I think, something we both did unintentionally, but it took a little bit of the focus, especially from me to her, off of us and on to just, okay, it's we're parents now. It's our responsibility to take care of a son. So we shifted our mindset a little bit from spouses to parents. And I think that was something that going back, if we could have done it a little bit over again, I wouldn't have shifted my mind so much from spouses to parents.
Yeah, it's not easy. Like, because it's your first baby, it's natural. Like, for us, I was all about our baby. Then my wife told me, we're going to have a baby, all right, but we need to think about our marriage, because our marriage comes first. And if we don't give our marriage a priority, our baby will come, spend 18 years with us or 20 years without, and then move out of the house and go live her life. And that wouldn't help us at all, because after the 18 years, we probably will be apart. So we thought about it very well, and we came to a conclusion that we still have to make our marriage a priority. And I'm glad you both were able to decide on that and think about your marriage and putting your marriage first before your kids came into the equation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So within your first year of marriage, I know you were from a different family. Your wife is also from a different family. How did you guys combine your different family upbringing?
Well, when we got married, my wife was raised Roman Catholic, and I was raised Greek Orthodox. And it was, they're similar, but they're both Christian, but, they're, both strong traditional religions or denominations. And we made a decision that we wanted to get, and this is actually a big sacrifice from my wife's perspective, that we wanted to get married in the Greek church. So my wife converted to Greek Orthodoxy, and we got married in the Greek church. And it was actually really cool, because there was a wonderful Greek church literally 2.5 blocks away from our apartment. So we could walk over on Sunday mornings to go to church there. In the move, we certainly missed some Sundays, but it was nice that we had this religion, that it wasn't just we were both born and raised one way, although I was born and raised that way, but it was something that we made a decision together to continue. And I think that, that really helped, just to having it be a decision that we made rather than our upbringing, and then we're just continuing, was something that I think was pretty special in our minds.
That's pretty good. I'm really glad you were both able to come to an agreement. It's something that a lot of couples don't usually look at. With some couples, some engaged couples, they even use that as a reason to not get married.
Yeah, and one thing that we always talked about is how, if you're like me, Greek Orthodox, or like she was raised Roman Catholic, or if you're, some other Christian denomination, really at the heart of it is really the same message, so to speak. There might be different interpretations of it, but, it would be really a shame to let even, the difference between two denominations that are relatively, close. I mean, they were historically they weren't. It wasn't like they were, completely different or anything like that. It would really be a shame to let the religion or two different observations on Christianity cause a fight or they both talk about being nice to each other. They both talk about this. It's the same principles, so to speak, but to let something like that cause hurt and heartache and chaos would be just such a shame. So I think from the beginning, we sort of agreed that whatever we're going to do it, as a reflection of the religion, as opposed to, some sort of negotiating point, like who's been to church more or who, who has more parents who go to church or anything like that.
Yeah. So Nick, I know with newlyweds, this is something that will happen over and over again, especially in the first year. You're going to have a fight, an argument, a disagreement, a problem, a conflict, something that you have to come together to resolve and overcome them. Would you want to walk us through a conflict or a problem that you had in your first year of marriage with your wife? I know it's something that probably every newlywed goes through that. There will be that big day that you probably fight over whether you left the toilet seat open or not.
Well, sure. Unfortunately, we had plenty of those in my first year, but and still to this, maybe not this day, we still have them, but not as much as we used to, thank God. But what really happened with me is that I started taking personal responsibility over changing things instead of pointing fingers or blaming. But for example, even with us, the toilet seat issue was an issue. I would keep it up, she would put it down, and when she put it down, it would make this loud noise, and I'd say, "Oh, it's so annoying. Can you just put it down gently?" And so, that actually was an issue with us. So the way I resolved it was, I said to myself, this is actually recently, but I said to myself, what can I do so that if I'm forgetful and leave the toilet seat up, she doesn't slam it down, or I can help it so that it doesn't, she doesn't mind just putting it down, and I don't get, this loud clapping noise while I'm sleeping or whatever it was. So I bought one of those slow descending toilet seats, and we're both happy. It's actually pretty amazing. You should get one. But, in our first year, what really came up a lot in that first year, because we were trying to figure out where we were going to move. We were in a 1-bedroom apartment. My wife actually wanted a 2-bedroom apartment. And if you know anything about New York real estate or New York rentals, it's expensive. So even with a 1-bedroom apartment in New York, we were paying almost $3,000 a month in rent.
Wow.
Yeah, and so my wife very naturally wanted. She knew we didn't need it, but she wanted a 2-bedroom apartment. So we started looking around in the neighborhoods that would be convenient for me to get to work, and also be convenient for her to be able to find other mothers and kids and activities and things like that. And everything we looked at was $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month for rent, and we just couldn't spring that. So it became at first a point of contention where I kept pointing at her saying, but this isn't a need. I know someone who's raised 3 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment, which is true. And she kept saying, yeah, but that's not what I want for my family. That's not what, I think it would be healthy for the kid. It would be, good for if we wanted to put him to bed early, we could close the door and not have to tiptoe to get in. So we had this back and forth for a little while until finally, even then, even though I hadn't really connected at the time the power of the personal accountability in marriage, I thought to myself, there has to be a way for everybody to win. So what we did was, we agreed that we would get a 2-bedroom apartment. And we agreed that it would be in a neighborhood where she could be around other mothers and I could get to work relatively easily. But we looked outside of New York. So, and ultimately we found a place in what became our home for the next 4.5 years, and where we've met some of the nicest and friendliest and just really true friends that we've had in our lives, and that was over in Hoboken, New Jersey. It was actually a quicker commute than several areas of New York, and because we were in New Jersey, we were able to get a 2-bedroom apartment for less than what we were paying for our 1-bedroom apartment in New York, and saving money on taxes. So it was win-win-win, and it was all because we finally paused and said, what are we arguing about? We're not arguing about this neighborhood or that neighborhood. If you break down the dispute, it really boils down to having a separate space for everybody and having more of a feel where we can decorate a place and for our son. We can, just some of the things that we really both wanted. And once we finally focused in on what the real issue was, it stopped becoming about whether I was going to be right or whether she was going to get something. And it became, how can we solve this together? And for me, how can I find a place that makes her happy in a reasonable way and in a way that really is a next step to building our family how we want it.
That is pretty amazing. I'm glad that you both figured out how to communicate with each other and resolve that conflict. With your marriage, like with the first year, did you have to learn about communicating with your spouse? Did you have to figure out ways to be able to effectively express your thoughts and what ideas or anything that you wanted to communicate to your wife?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because in the first year of marriage, we had been dating for 3 years or so before we got married, and so you think I've known this person for 3 years. What's the difference? We just get married or whatever. But really, there was a different focus for us, and there is a different context within which you're speaking. So you're not speaking as the girlfriend. I can if I don't want to speak with her, I can just call her the next day or whatever it was. It is, this is someone I have committed to spending the rest of my life with. She needs to be the focus, although I, screwed that up a few times because I focused more on work. But, she needs to be the focus. She needs to be someone that I'm looking to build with. So there really is a contextual shift once you're married, and especially in the first year, because that's where the main shift is, or at least the first shift in a relationship. You have parents after that, but for us in the first year, it was a challenge for me to communicate because I was working 40, 50, and not 40. I was working 50, 60, 70 hours or more a week. And it was in a very hectic environment. And my wife was out in New York with me, and she had some friends, but she didn't have her family around. All of our family was in Massachusetts. So, she was clearly feeling a little bit ignored. And I was trying, and in my mind I was trying to balance this need to be successful at work so that it would all trickle down into my family life, which was obviously the wrong order. Yeah, but with the desire to make her feel that she's not alone. So what I would rush through conversations and be very blunt just so I could get my point across in the little time that I made for those conversations. And it was really a mistake because when I would, instead of having a full conversation, I would just get to the point. And oftentimes getting to the point, I didn't actually get to the point. I just said the point. So the conversations were, this is an answer, as opposed to, well, let me see really what you're looking to do here and how can we work together to make this happen. Like the apartment, had I just said, no, 2 bedrooms are too expensive, let's stick with a 1 bedroom, people have done with it before. That was how I felt. But if I had just stuck with that, then I would have never gotten to the point of finding out what she was truly envisioning and how we can make that happen in a way that was comfortable and actually was one of the better decisions we've made in a long, long time.
Yeah, that's good. So with your move to the new apartment, before you got married, did you guys combine your finances at all?
We did not. No. We've since, we have our joint accounts and things like that. And we each had some property before we got married, so we kept something separate to keep the accounts stable for those purposes. But no, we did not. We each had even separate banks, not even the same bank.
So after you got married, did you have to combine your finances at all, or you guys decided to not combine your finances? You decided to have separate accounts, but you still agreed on who pays what bills and how the money is spent? Well,
we did combine accounts, but we didn't combine all accounts because we each had legacy type businesses. So she had a rental property and I had a rental property with a partner. So,
okay.
Part of it was, had we combined everything, we would have combined her with the business partner of mine for the rental property. And, for partly because we didn't want, if something were to go wrong with one of the with my rental property, we didn't want to have her lose something or whatever it was. We kept something separate. But for our daily and our, our monthly bills and things like that, we had combined accounts into which, once we got married, at least for the first year, basically, we both worked outside the home and earned income. But right after that, it was just a single income. So after the first year, but it's still a joint account where the the monthly expenses, if my wife is at the store and spends, it all comes out of the joint account and things like that.
Wow, I'm really impressed with your first year marriage experience. It looks like you both had some tough times and you both had some really exciting times. Do you want to share with us any of the exciting moments that you have?
Well, I think there were probably two really moments that sort of stand out. They both involve when we started when we learned about and started planning about having our son. And the first one was when we found out that it was a boy, and we both really were perfectly fine with having either a boy or a girl. It didn't make a difference to us. Turns out we now have one of each. But when we had a son, my wife was really excited, and I was really excited. And we have a family tradition, and it's really a Greek tradition where the oldest son is named after the father's father, and the middle name is named after the father. So my name is Nick Paul. My dad's name is Paul Nick. His dad's Nick Paul, because I'm the eldest son of an eldest son of an eldest son. So it goes back several generations where it just flip-flops. So, when we had a son, my wife and I had talked for a couple of years, even before we got married, about how great it would be if we had a son, whether it's the first child or second child or whatever, if we had a son that we could continue the tradition with. And when we found out it was a boy, it was a very happy moment, because it really is a connection back, decades and hundreds of years to the first, Nick Pavlidis or Paul Pavlidis. So that was pretty exciting to just have that sort of, even just a name, you have that sort of connection back so many years. And then, the second thing that it's, probably pretty exciting for both of us. Obviously the first one was exciting for my wife because of how much it meant to me and how she really enjoys, traditions in general. But it was really about my family history as opposed to, our nucleus together. But the second one was when we made the decision for her to stay home with our son. She was in a very high-stress job. So even if she wasn't in a very high-stress job, it would have been great. But it came, when she was working 12 hours a day, she was a buyer in the fashion industry, and she would buy fabric from around the world. And it's just a very high pressure and really a 24-hour type of job, because you're communicating with people in Asia and Europe and the Middle East and all throughout the United States, depending on what side of the transaction you're dealing with, whether you're buying the fabric or whether you're, sourcing other materials, or whether you're selling it to or dividing it among the company's divisions. She could be talking with New York or talking with China or talking with Turkey. And for her, it was very high stress. And for really anybody, it's very high stress. So when we made this decision for her to come home with our son, it was a moment where we felt like we were making a very strong decision for our family. And for me personally, I felt very excited that my wife was going to be with our son, and that we were, blessed with being in a position where we could budget for that. And it made me feel good as a provider and as someone who just was madly in love with my wife at the time, to see her so happy and her so connected with our son. It was just all around. It was just such a really exciting time.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I remember we had our daughter in our second year. It wasn't the first year, in our second year. And I remember when we had that discussion to sit down and talk about Ashley staying home, and that was her dream. That was her dream job. That's what she wanted to do for her life, and she wanted to be able to stay home with our kids. And I was really happy we're fortunate enough to also have that opportunity whereby she could stay home. So Nick, what book have you read that has impacted your marriage the most, and how did it impact your marriage?
You know, it's funny because I think the book that impacted my marriage the most, and I've read several marriage books, so particularly over the past year or so, is not a parenting book, but it's a business book, and there's a related book that is a parenting book. But it wasn't a marriage book, and it's QBQ, The Question Behind the Question by John Miller.
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah, and Parenting the QBQ Way, which is a similar topic, but focusing on parenting by John Miller and his wife Karen. And you know what was really powerful about that is when you apply the concept of personal accountability to your marriage. And in QBQ, it's talking about basically a business context, and QBQ, the parenting way, or parenting the QBQ way, is talking about taking personal accountability in your parenting. But personal accountability as a topic is something that is so flexible yet so powerful that you can apply it to several aspects and pretty much every aspect of your life to actually effectuate change. And it reduces frustrations. It keeps you from pointing fingers. And what it did for me was, even as recently as, several months ago, my wife, like I mentioned earlier, she's cleaner than I am. And so sometimes, I'll take off, or I'll take a sweater out and I'll put it on the dresser for the next morning. And my wife will put it back in the dresser because she just sees it as clutter. And, I know that she's not trying to, put it away. I know it has nothing to do with me that she's putting it away. It's just in her mind, she's just cleaning up as she walks by. And at first it was really frustrating for me because I put it out there because I didn't want to, in the morning, I didn't want it to be wrinkled or whatever. But I paused and actually thought, it just so happened one night that underneath the sweater, I think it was Parenting the QBQ Way book. And I thought to myself, what could I have done differently? Or what can I do so that we can avoid this sort of my shirt's out or my sweater's out, or these little things that became bigger issues because of how I reacted to it. What can I do to make things differently? So I actually, instead of saying, why did you leave the sweater out, or didn't you couldn't you tell what I put everything else away but this? Why do you don't you think there was a reason for that? That would have just been a terrible thing to say, and a couple of years ago, that would have been the first thing out of my mouth. But, after reading those books, the QBQ book and Parenting the QBQ Way, I instead paused and I said, I said out loud to her, what could I do? What do you think I could do to, have my shirt out overnight, but without you, being bothered by it on top of the sweater or something to that effect, on top of the dresser or something to that effect. And she just said, well, why don't you lay it out in your office? And it was as simple as that. And laying it out in my office was just as easy as laying it out on the dresser. It was no more of a burden on me, but it solved an issue in our marriage that had come up several times when I would either be frustrated and not say anything because my sweater's gone, or I would actually say, don't you think, where's the sweater? I put it there. It was like it was just a terrible mindset that I was in, constantly saying, what could she have done differently, as opposed to what can I do differently? And it was all based on the QBQ. Well, finally applying the principles of QBQ that I had applied in business and other settings to my marriage.
Yeah, that is a really good read. I remember when I read it. It gave me a new twist to everything, because now it's not about thinking about who is doing what. It's about what can I do to change the situation? What can I do to make things better? What can I do to make things easier? And that was a mindset that has really helped me in my life and in my marriage, because sometimes there are certain things that you expect your spouse to do. It could be that is what they're supposed to do, like maybe paying the phone bill or the TV bill, and maybe they forgot about it, but you inherently remember it because you're the one who remembers things a lot. And because of that, you'll be able to ask yourself, what can I do to be able to make sure that this bill gets paid? And that will help you guys prevent you guys from getting that extra fee or extra charge that will come as a result of a late payment.
Yeah, and sometimes even if you ask yourself that, and sometimes I've asked myself questions like that, and the answer right away is not apparent. So I'll just say it out loud, and I'll ask my wife, what can I do to make it so you have it a little easier with the kids, or at that bath time or whatever it is, or you're able to get to see your show at 10 o'clock. Is there something I can do to help you? And she always has an answer, and it always resolves whatever the issue is. It's just such a powerful technique that if you don't have the answer, your spouse will. So ask her.
Yeah, definitely. So Nick, what is the one lesson or marriage advice that you wish you had known either during your first year of marriage or before you got married that you believe will help newlyweds to build a strong foundation for a very happy, healthy, and successful marriage?
Well, I mean, I think in general, the concept of personal accountability, and that if strong businesses are built on strong relationships, and the same principles that I enjoyed and applied in a business setting apply equally, if not better, in the most important relationship that you'll have on this earth, at least, and that's marriage. But as a subset of that, I would say the thing that got in my way the most in my first year was keeping score. And it was, I work 10 hours, you work 9 hours. So that means you must be less tired than I am, or whatever. It when you think about it that way, it sounds pretty dumb, but it was such and I don't know if it's because I'm in a career and a profession that is I'm a litigator. So, it was very win based, and it's very, there is scorekeeping, but not even if you have the most points at the end of the scorekeeping in marriage, you first of all probably counted the score wrong. Second of all, it doesn't matter, because that's not what marriage is not about. Who washed more dishes, or who worked more hours, or who napped longer, or whatever it is. It's so unhealthy to focus on me versus you in a marriage, and I did focus on that for way too long. And had I shifted or got rid of that thinking in the first year, it would certainly have made for a much stronger foundation.
I'm glad that you shared that with us, and I believe our listeners will be able to apply that in their own lives, because all the lessons that you've shared today with us is something that I can also apply in my marriage today and even in the future. So Nick, thank you very much for sharing your first year experience with us. We all appreciate learning from your journey, and we wish you the best with your marriage, and we believe you're going to have an awesome marriage. Before we part ways, do you want to share with us any projects that you're working on, any exciting things that you have going on? I know you have a podcast that you'll be launching pretty soon, or you probably, if this podcast goes out later than expected, then you probably have launched your podcast called A Terrible Husband. Do you want to share anything or any insights about those projects that you're working on with us?
Sure. I'm doing two podcasts. One launches in, as of this recording in mid-July. It'll be launching within the next week or so, and that's 5 Minutes with Dad. And that is a podcast where my 5-year-old son, we started when he was 4, so we have a couple episodes when he was 4 that we'll be releasing. My 5-year-old son and I, we just hang out together for about 5 minutes, and we'll talk about, robots or, things that we did together. And what that podcast is designed to do, it's a very short podcast, between 5 and 15 minutes, depending on the conversation. But what that's designed to do is really encourage and inspire other parents to put their phones down, put their computers away, and just spend some quality time with their kids. And the other podcast that you mentioned is Confessions of a Terrible Husband. And what that is, it's a podcast about taking personal responsibility over improving your marriage. So stop pointing the fingers and start asking yourself what I can do to make my marriage stronger. And you can find that at aterriblehusband.com.
Thank you very much, Nick. And with listeners, you can find all of these resources when you head over to firstyearmarriage.com/2 for all the show notes. Thank you again, Nick, for sharing your experience with us. We really appreciate your time, and we are glad you took some time off your busy schedule to share your experience with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the First Year Marriage Show. To submit a question, feedback, or suggestions for the podcast, visit firstyearmarriage.com/feedback. Apply what you've learned today and build a strong foundation for the happy, healthy, and lasting marriage you desire. Enjoy your marriage. Enjoy your life.